My name is Serena. For 10 years, I was the ghost in the machine at Sterling and Croft, one of the most prestigious architectural firms in the country. I was the one who made the impossible geometry work, the one who found the elegant solution to the zoning nightmare, the one who translated the vague, poetic napkin sketches of our celebrated senior partner Maddox into buildable, breathtaking reality. I lived in the shadow, but it was a comfortable shadow. I told myself it was where the real work got done. Then came the commission for the new City Art Museum. This wasn't just another glass and steel skyscraper. This was a legacy project, a cultural landmark that would define the city's skyline for the next century. And the design that won the commission, the design that beat out every other major firm in a brutal year-long competition, was mine. Every curve, every line, every impossible cantilever holding up a sky of glass, it all came from my mind, from my hands, during 1,000 nights fueled by stale coffee and a burning need to create something perfect. It was supposed to be the project that pulled me out of the shadows and into the light. It was supposed to make my career. Instead, it became the stage for the most profound and public betrayal of my life. I remember the weight of the air in the press conference room, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of anticipation. I was standing at the back, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The mayor was at the podium, a constellation of camera flashes glinting off his glasses. He was talking about vision, about legacy, about a building that was a work of art in itself. And then he said the name, Maddox. He announced Maddox as the sole visionary, the singular genius behind the design. And on the massive screen behind the stage, my renderings, my intricate animations, my soul laid bare in wireframe and light, began to play, his masterpiece. That's what they called it. My masterpiece. He stood there, soaking in the applause, a practiced, humble smile on his face. He never once looked in my direction. He didn't have to. In that moment, I wasn't a person. I was just a tool he was finished using. But here's the thing about architects. We understand structure. We know that the most beautiful facades can hide the most fatal flaws. And Maddox, in his arrogance, thought he had stolen my design. He thought he had everything. But he only had the copies. The beautiful, flawless, perfect copies I let him see. Because in the official blueprints, the ones I personally filed with the city planning department under his name, I left a secret, a tiny, elegant, and absolutely critical miscalculation in the structural engineering of the central atrium's support system. It was a flaw so subtle, so deeply embedded in the physics of the design, that only one person in the world would ever know to look for it, and only one person knew how to fix it. That person was me. This is the story of how I built my masterpiece, and then how I built a cage for the man who tried to steal it. It's a story about the difference between having your name on a building and having your hands build it. If you've ever felt invisible at work, if you've ever poured your soul into something only to watch someone else take the credit, then stick with me for this. It really helps to know that I'm not screaming into the void. The drive home from the press conference was a vacuum. The sound of the city, the horns, the sirens, it all faded into a dull, distant roar, like the ocean heard from inside a seashell. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles were bone white, the only points of color in my grayed-out world. I didn't go to the after-party. I didn't stick around to watch Maddox clink champagne glasses and accept congratulations for my work. I just slipped out the side door, a ghost leaving her own haunting. My apartment was dark. I didn't turn on the lights. The only illumination came from the city glow filtering through the large window in my living room, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. In the center of the room, on a large drafting table, was the scale model of the museum. I had built it myself, piece by painstaking piece, over the course of 3 months. Tiny balsa wood beams, laser-cut acrylic panels, miniature steel dowels representing the massive support columns. It was a perfect replica, a jewel box of my own creation. My first instinct was primal. A hot white wave of fury washed over me, and my hands clenched into fists. I wanted to sweep it all off the table. I wanted to hear it shatter, to stomp the wreckage into dust, to destroy the physical manifestation of my stolen dream. My arm was already tensing, my muscles coiling to release this scream of a movement. But then I stopped. My hand hovered over the delicate glass roof of the atrium, the centerpiece of the entire design. I looked at the way the miniature supports curved up to meet it, like hands lifting an offering to the sky. It was beautiful. It was mine. And destroying it would only be destroying another part of myself. The rage didn't vanish. It just changed. The heat receded, and in its place, a strange crystalline cold began to form in my chest. It was the kind of cold that doesn't numb, but sharpens. It focuses. It was the quiet, absolute calm of a surgeon before the first incision. I sank into the chair at the table, and just looked at the model, my model, for hours. And as I sat there in the dark, the memories began to play back, not in a torrent, but in a slow, methodical sequence, like a project manager reviewing a timeline for its critical failures. It hadn't started with the museum. Betrayal is rarely a singular event. It's a foundation laid brick by brick, 1,000 tiny compromises and overlooked slights that build a structure of disrespect. Maddox hadn't just woken up one day and decided to steal my magnum opus. He had been practicing for years. I remembered the Patterson Tower project, 5 years ago. It was a corporate headquarters, fairly standard, but the client was demanding a lobby that was both grand and intimate, a contradiction in terms. The team was stuck. Maddox had been selling them on a cavernous, impersonal marble monstrosity. I stayed up all night, reworking the floor plan. I introduced a series of tiered floating mezzanines, clad in warm oak, that broke up the vertical space. It created smaller, human-scaled pockets within the larger volume, a series of intimate conversations within a grand statement. It was a brilliant solution. I presented it in our internal review. Maddox had looked at my sketches, a flicker of something, surprise, envy, in his eyes. He'd nodded slowly and said, "That's a very clever starting point, Serena. Let me take this and see if I can integrate it into the primary design language." In the client meeting the next day, he presented my mezzanine concept as his own breakthrough. He'd made a few cosmetic tweaks, changed the wood from oak to walnut, and called it his vision for human-centric verticality. When the client raved about it, Maddox had put a paternalistic hand on my shoulder and said, "Serena, here was a big help in modeling the final concept." A help, like I was the intern who fetched the coffee and collated the printouts. I felt a quiet heat flush up my neck, but I said nothing. I smiled and nodded. It was a team win, I told myself. My idea was getting built. That was what mattered. It was a lie, and I knew it, but it was a necessary one to keep going. Then there was the zoning variance for the Helios building 2 years later. We were dead in the water. The city code had a strict setback requirement that was making our footprint unworkable. The project was on the verge of collapse. Maddox was panicking, which for him meant shouting at junior associates and making vague, threatening pronouncements about right-sizing the team. He saw problems. I saw puzzles. I spent a weekend buried in the city's zoning archives, not the digital ones, but the actual dusty paper records in the basement of the planning department. And I found it. A tiny forgotten loophole from the 1970s, a solar access clause that was intended to protect community gardens. It was archaic and obscure, but it had never been repealed. I wrote a 20-page legal and architectural argument showing how our building's reflective glass facade could actually increase the ambient light reaching a small, neglected park 3 blocks away, thereby satisfying the spirit of the old code. It was a long shot, a piece of strategic jujitsu. I gave the brief to Maddox. He read it. His eyes narrowed. He asked a few sharp questions, testing the logic. Then he said, "Leave this with me." The next thing I knew, he was being quoted in the architectural press about his innovative, historically grounded approach to urban planning. He had taken my brief, signed his name to it, and presented it as his own solo legal and architectural triumph. He saved the $100 million project, and he didn't even mention my name in the company-wide email announcing the victory. That time, the silence was harder. The lie I told myself, that the work was what mattered, was wearing thin. The foundation of my loyalty was beginning to show cracks. It was around then that I started having regular lunches with Arthur Vance. Arthur was a legend, one of the firm's original structural engineers. He was semi-retired now, only coming in a couple of days a week to consult on the truly impossible problems. He was a small, wiry man, with hands stained by decades of graphite and ink, and eyes that saw the stress points in everything, from a cantilevered roof to a young architect's career. He'd seen my work on the Patterson Tower, and sought me out. Our lunches in the dusty old diner down the street became my sanctuary. He'd listen patiently as I vented my frustrations, stirring his coffee with a slow, deliberate motion. I remember one day, after the Helios incident, I was particularly despondent. I told him I felt like a ghostwriter for a man who couldn't even read. Arthur took a slow sip of his coffee and looked at me over the rim of his cup. "He doesn't build things, Serena," he said, his voice a low rumble. "He puts his name on things. There's a difference. Maddox designs from the top down. He imagines the grand gesture, the photo in the magazine. He doesn't care how it stands up. That's for people like you to figure out. He sees you as a tool, a very effective one, but a tool nonetheless." I must have looked devastated, because his expression softened slightly. "It's not your fault. It's the nature of the beast. But you have to be smart. This industry, this firm, it's full of men who will let you build the entire house, and then thank you for handing them the keys. You can't stop them from trying, but you can build your own doors. You can build your own escape hatches." He tapped his temple with a crooked finger. "Always have your own set of plans, kid. Not just for the building, for yourself." His words stuck with me. They became a quiet mantra. Always have your own set of plans. It was a warning, but it was also a permission slip. It gave me a framework for what was to come, even if I didn't know it yet. The museum project was different. From the moment the city announced the competition, I knew it was the one. My design wasn't an iteration or an improvement on someone else's idea. It came to me whole, a vision that woke me up at 3 a.m. The central atrium, a vast open space flooded with natural light, with a roof that seemed to float, held up by a series of impossibly thin, curving supports. I called them sky trusses. They were meant to evoke the delicate bones of a bird's wing. It was structurally audacious, a marriage of brutalist strength and organic grace. I worked on it in secret at first, on my own time. I filled sketchbooks. I ran preliminary physics simulations on my home computer. I obsessed over it. It was the purest thing I had ever designed. When I finally showed the concept to Maddox, he was uncharacteristically silent. He walked around my desk, studying the sketches from every angle. He didn't offer a single condescending improvement. He just looked at it, then at me, and said, "This is it. This is the one that wins." For a brief, foolish moment, I felt a surge of hope. I thought, this time it will be different. This is too big, too important. He can't possibly take this. He assigned me a small, dedicated team, a junior associate named Liam, a bright, earnest kid who worshipped my technical skills, and a few drafters. We were given a cordoned-off section of the office, our own little war room. For 6 months we lived and breathed the museum. Maddox would swing by once a day, stand at the door with his arms crossed, nod, and say, "Good progress. Keep it up." He was a visitor in my world. Liam saw it. He was young, but he wasn't naive. One evening, as we were pinning up the final presentation boards, he said quietly, "You know, he talks about this in the partner meetings, like he's the one staying up all night." I just shrugged, the old lie ready on my lips. "He's the face of the firm, Liam. He's the one who sells it. We just have to make it perfect." Liam looked at me, his expression a mixture of admiration and pity. "It's already perfect, Serena. It's yours." The night before we submitted the final competition package, I was alone in the office. The boards were done. The digital files were on the server, ready to be sent. Everyone had gone home. I stood in our little war room, surrounded by a year of my life. The walls were covered in discarded sketches, structural calculations, material samples. It was a complete record of creation. And Arthur's words echoed in my head. "Always have your own set of plans." Maddox had become more and more possessive of the design. As the submission date neared, he started referring to it as my museum in conversations. He was already writing the victory speech in his head. And in that quiet, empty office, the cold certainty settled over me. He was going to take it all. He wouldn't just minimize my role. He would erase it completely. It wasn't about revenge. That thought, even then, felt too hot, too emotional. This was colder. This was about physics. It was about action and reaction. It was about structural integrity. His ego had become a liability, a flaw in the system, and if he was going to put his name on my work, then he was going to have to take responsibility for all of it. Every last perfect, deliberately flawed detail. That night I went back to my workstation. I opened the master files for the structural blueprints. I pulled up the specifications for the sky trusses in the main atrium, and I made a change. A small one. I changed the required grade of steel for the primary support tensors from the custom-fabricated titanium-infused alloy I had specifically developed with a metallurgist to a high-strength but standard off-the-shelf structural steel. Then I adjusted the torque specifications for the tensioning sequence. On the surface, the change was almost undetectable. The math still worked, just barely. The load calculations were still within a plausible-looking tolerance. Any cursory review would pass it, but I knew the truth. I knew that the standard steel had a different coefficient of thermal expansion. I knew that in the summer heat, under the direct sunlight of the glass atrium roof, it would expand just a few millimeters more than my original design accounted for. And I knew that with the incorrect tensioning sequence, that tiny expansion wouldn't be distributed evenly. It would create a microscopic torque, a minute twisting force, at the core of the support structure. It wouldn't be enough to cause a collapse. That would be monstrous, unethical, but it would be enough to cause the load sensors, embedded deep within the concrete pylons, to scream red. It would be enough to show stress fractures on any half-decent ultrasonic scan. It would be enough to instantly, catastrophically, and publicly fail the city's first major structural integrity inspection. It was a time bomb, coated in physics and steel, set to go off not with a bang, but with the quiet, damning finality of an inspector's red pen. I saved the flawed version to the firm's main server, in the folder marked Final Submission. Then I copied the original, correct and beautiful plans onto a small encrypted solid-state drive that I wore on a chain around my neck. I went home as the sun was rising. I had never slept better. The catalyst that turned my cold resolve into a concrete plan came 3 days after the press conference. I was in a fugue state, going through the motions of life, my mind a cold, quiet engine running calculations. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text from Liam. "This is garbage. He's taking everything. We all know it was you. The whole team knows. We're not stupid." Reading that message, something shifted inside me. Until then, the betrayal had felt isolating, a personal wound. But Liam's words were a reminder that I wasn't just a ghost to everyone. My work, my contribution was seen. It was known. My team, the ones who were in the trenches with me, they knew the truth. Maddox hadn't just stolen from me. He had lied to them too. He had erased their leader, and by extension their work. His lie wasn't just a personal insult. It was a systemic one. It poisoned the well for everyone. I looked again at the model of the museum on my table. I thought of Arthur's words, "Build your own doors." He had been right. I couldn't expect the system to reward me. I couldn't expect the man who benefited from the system's flaws to fix them. The system itself had to be exposed as structurally unsound, and the only way to do that was to let it fail, publicly and spectacularly, under the weight of its own arrogance. The time for quiet resentment was over. The time for patient, methodical demolition had begun. My plan wasn't born from a single flash of inspiration. It was assembled, piece by piece, with the same meticulous care I used to design a building. It was an architecture of consequence. The first step was understanding my leverage. My power wasn't in the anger or the injustice. It was in the information. I had the truth, and I had the fix. The flawed blueprints were the lock. The corrected plans on the drive around my neck were the key. But a key is useless without the right door to open. I knew I couldn't fight Sterling and Croft head-on. They had a team of corporate lawyers who could bury me in litigation until I was bankrupt and my reputation was a crater. A direct accusation of theft would devolve into a messy he said, she said battle that Maddox, with his charm and industry standing, would almost certainly win. He would paint me as a disgruntled, hysterical junior who couldn't handle the pressure. No, this couldn't be a fight. It had to be a controlled demolition. I needed to let Maddox's own hubris do the work for me. His name was on the flawed plans. His signature was on the city filings. His reputation was tied to the project like a ship to an anchor. All I had to do was wait for the storm. My foresight had been more than just a vague premonition. It was a series of small, deliberate actions taken over the past year. It started with Arthur's advice. I began to document everything. Every design decision, every calculation, every meeting. I kept a private work journal on my personal laptop, a running log of my contributions, with dates, times, and summaries of conversations. It was my own secret set of minutes, a shadow ledger of the firm's intellectual property. When Maddox would steal a small idea, I would note it. March 12th, presented mezzanine concept. Enid appropriated it for client meeting on March 13th. It wasn't emotional, it was data entry. It was, I told myself, just good professional practice. The most crucial part of this was how I involved my allies, often without them even realizing the full scope of their role. I used Liam, my earnest junior associate, as an unwitting failsafe. A few weeks before the final submission, I had isolated a small, seemingly innocuous section of the atrium's structural plans, a connection plate for one of the secondary struts. I sent it to him via the firm's official internal messaging system. The message read, "Liam, can you do a quick cross-check on these specs for me? Just want a second pair of eyes before we lock it in." The section I sent him was from the flawed set of plans. The specs were, on their own, perfectly fine. They were standard by-the-book engineering. There was no reason for him to flag anything. He replied 5 minutes later, "Looks good to me, Serena." Standard procedure. I saved a screenshot of the exchange. It was a beautiful little piece of plausible deniability. If anyone ever questioned why I hadn't caught the error in the plans, I had a digital record. It showed me following procedure, seeking a second opinion from a team member who also saw nothing wrong. It was a breadcrumb, a tiny piece of camouflage that hid my deliberate action in the foliage of everyday corporate process. Maddox thought he was erasing me, but I was busy creating a paper trail that erased my own fingerprints from the weapon I was building. Then there was Arthur. My relationship with him was my most important asset. He wasn't just a mentor, he was my ace in the hole. About a month before the submission, I had asked him to dinner, not at our usual greasy spoon, but at a quiet, respectable restaurant. I brought my personal laptop. I told him I was exploring a theoretical design challenge, a personal project I was working on in my spare time. I showed him the 2 versions of the atrium's structural design. First, the flawed one. I asked him, as a hypothetical, what his analysis would be. He studied it for a long time, his old eyes tracing the lines of force on the screen. He made a few notes on a napkin. "It's aggressive," he said, finally. The tolerances are razor thin. It relies on the steel and the tensioning being absolutely perfect. 100 things would have to go right. I wouldn't sign off on it. It's not unsafe, not in a catastrophic way, but it's brittle. It has no grace. It would fail an integrity review. It's the work of someone who cares more about the picture than the physics. Then I showed him the original, correct version, the one with the titanium-infused alloy and the nuanced tensioning sequence. His eyes lit up. A slow smile spread across his face. "Ah," he said, tapping the screen. "There, you see, that's the breadth. That's the flexibility. It distributes the load. It accounts for the unexpected. It's strong because it's smart. This is a beautiful piece of engineering, Serena. This is how it's meant to be." I didn't tell him what I was planning. I didn't need to. I just needed his expert opinion. And now I had it. He was my independent validator, the unimpeachable authority, who could, when the time was right, confirm that my design was the right one, and the one Maddox was building was fundamentally flawed. It wasn't about revenge. It was about professional validation. It was about having the truth on my side, certified by the best in the business. The final piece of the puzzle was the escape route. An escape hatch, as Arthur would say. It materialized a year before the museum project even began. I was at a national architecture conference in Chicago. I had presented a small paper on sustainable materials in high-rise construction, a side project I'd been passionate about. It was a niche topic, and the room was half empty. After my presentation, a woman approached me. She was sharp, elegant, with an air of controlled energy. She introduced herself as Eleanor Vance, a senior partner at Kinsley Dyer, one of our biggest rivals. "That was a brilliant presentation, Serena," she said, her handshake firm. "Your analysis of tensile strength in recycled composites is years ahead of what most firms are doing." We talked for half an hour. She was whip smart, and she didn't just listen. She engaged, asking incisive questions. As we parted, she handed me her card. It was thick, expensive cardstock, her name embossed in a clean, modern font. "My father speaks very highly of you," she said, and it took me a second to make the connection. Vance. Arthur Vance. She was Arthur's daughter. A small, knowing smile played on her lips. "He says you're the one actually holding that place together. If you ever get tired of living in Maddox's shadow, give me a call." At KD, we put the architect's name on the front of the building, not just in the footnotes. I had kept the card. It sat in a small box in my desk drawer, a dormant possibility. At the time, I was flattered but loyal. Sterling and Croft was my home, I thought. Now, that card felt like a key. Kinsley Dyer wasn't just a rival firm. It was Arthur's legacy, through his daughter. It was a place where my value might actually be recognized. It was the door for my escape hatch. The actual process of the blueprint switch was an exercise in quiet audacity. The firm had a rigid protocol for filing major project plans with the city. Everything had to be routed through the central server, logged by the project manager, and given a final sign-off by the partner in charge. Maddox, of course. I followed the protocol to the letter. On the designated day, I sat at my desk and initiated the transfer of the master files to the city's digital portal. I uploaded the Flawed set, the one with the steel and tensioning time bomb. I watched the progress bar crawl across the screen. Each percentage point felt like a step closer to an inevitable future. When it was complete, the system generated an automatic notification to Maddox Museum Project. "Final blueprints, filed with City Planning Dept." 30 seconds later, I got an email back from him. A single word: excellent. He hadn't even opened the files. He trusted me to do the work, and his arrogance trusted that my work would always be in service to him. He didn't realize that my competence was no longer his asset. It was my weapon. I leaned back in my chair, the encrypted drive around my neck suddenly feeling warm against my skin. The fuse was lit. The structure was set to fail, and the man who put his name on it had just personally thanked me for lighting the match. I sat there for a long time, the only sound the quiet hum of the server room down the hall. I felt a profound sense of calm. A chapter was closing. The ghost was about to leave the machine, and she was taking the operating system with her. The weeks after the press conference were a masterclass in self-control. I went to work every day. I smiled in the hallways. I answered Maddox's emails. On the surface, I was the same loyal, hard-working Serena. But inside, I was a strategist counting down the days. The first phase of my plan was a quiet, orderly withdrawal. I couldn't just vanish. That would look suspicious. I had to orchestrate my exit as a natural, inevitable next step. 2 weeks after the disastrous press conference, I scheduled a meeting with Maddox. I walked into his cavernous office, the one with the sweeping view of the city, the skyline I had helped shape. He was on the phone, laughing, one expensive shoe propped up on his polished mahogany desk. He waved me in, finishing his call with a flourish. "Serena," he said, his voice magnanimous, as if he were bestowing a great honor just by saying my name. "Good news. The city has fast-tracked the initial site permits. We're breaking ground next month. Our museum is on its way." Our museum. The word hung in the air between us. A monument to his audacity. I gave him a small, placid smile. "That's wonderful news, Maddox. And that's actually part of why I wanted to talk to you." I slid a single white envelope across the vast expanse of his desk. He looked at it, then at me, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second. He picked it up, his movements suddenly slow, cautious. He slid it open with a silver letter opener, and read the single sheet of paper inside. His face went blank. "You're resigning?" he asked, the word tasting foreign in his mouth. "Why? This is the project of a lifetime. Your name will be on this forever." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. "It's been 10 years, Maddox," I said, my voice even and calm. "It's just time for me to take a break, to reassess. I'm thinking of taking a long sabbatical, maybe travel." He leaned back, studying me, the gears turning in his political mind. He was looking for the angle, the hidden threat, but he found none. My resignation was clean, professional, and utterly devoid of emotion, and that, I think, is what reassured him. An angry departure would have been a red flag. A calm, quiet one, that was just a subordinate moving on. In fact, it was perfect for him. With me gone, there was no one left to even whisper that the design wasn't his. He could completely own the narrative. "Well," he said, recovering his swagger, "I'm disappointed, of course. You've been a great asset. But I understand. We'll be sad to see you go." He stood up and extended his hand. "Good luck, Serena." I shook it. His grip was firm, confident. He had no idea he was shaking the hand of the woman who had just signed his professional death warrant. I walked out of that office, and I didn't look back. My sabbatical lasted exactly 1 weekend. On Monday morning, while Maddox was probably leading a triumphant project kickoff meeting at Sterling and Croft, I was sitting in a minimalist, light-filled conference room on the 45th floor of the Kinsley Dyer building. Across the table sat Eleanor Vance. She looked exactly as I remembered, sharp, focused, radiating a calm intensity. I had emailed her on Friday, using the address from her business card. The subject line was simple: Arthur Vance's recommendation. The body of the email was even simpler: "Eleanor, I'm ready to get out of the shadow. I have something you need to see. Serena." She had replied in under 5 minutes. Monday, 9 a.m. My office. I hadn't brought a resume. I hadn't brought a portfolio. I brought my laptop and the encrypted drive. For 20 minutes I laid it all out. I showed her my original design, the passion project. I walked her through the subtle, fatal flaw I had embedded in the official blueprints. I showed her the screenshot of my conversation with Liam, my legal and professional alibi. I explained Maddox's history of credit theft. I didn't present it as a woman scorned. I presented it as a structural engineer diagnosing a critical failure in a competitor's system. When I finished, I slid the encrypted drive across the table. "This," I said, "is the corrected, structurally sound, and truly beautiful version of the City Art Museum, and I am the only architect in the world who can oversee its construction." Eleanor didn't speak for a full minute. She just looked at me, her expression unreadable. I felt a tremor of doubt. Had I miscalculated? Was this too much? Too ruthless? Then a slow, brilliant smile spread across her face. It was the smile of a chess player who has just seen a path to checkmate in 3 moves. "My God," she said, her voice a mixture of awe and amusement. "My father was right. You're not just an architect, you're a demolitions expert." She picked up the drive. "And what is it you want, Serena?" "I want what Maddox was offered," I said, my voice steady. "I want a full partnership. I want to lead the museum project, and I want Kinsley Dyer's legal team on retainer, effective immediately, to handle any and all fallout." Eleanor leaned back in her chair and laughed, a genuine delighted sound. "Fallout? My dear, this isn't fallout, this is a gift. Maddox isn't just going to fail an inspection. He's going to hand the single most prestigious project in the city to his biggest rival on a silver platter, and he's going to do it on the public record. This is the quietest corporate takeover I've ever seen." She stood up and extended her hand. "Welcome to Kinsley Dyer, partner." The next 2 months were a strange, silent war. I was officially a partner at KD, but my role was covert. We codenamed the project Phoenix. I worked out of a private office with my own dedicated server, refining the construction schedule for the real museum, sourcing the correct materials, and preparing the documentation. My only contact with the outside world was Eleanor and a very discreet team of KD lawyers who were preparing for every eventuality. Meanwhile, across town, Maddox was building his monument to a lie. My intel came from Liam. He had stayed at Sterling and Croft, and he was my mole, my pair of eyes and ears on the ground. He had been devastated by my resignation, but understood when I told him to stay put and just observe. His texts were a running commentary on the unfolding disaster. September 15. First shipment of steel arrived. The foreman on site is confused. Says the grade doesn't match what he'd expect for a truss system this ambitious. Maddox told him to stop complaining and follow the plans. October 3. They're starting to rig the tensioning cables in the east pylon. The contractor's engineer is raising red flags about the torque sequence. Maddox is furious. He called the guy a glorified plumber and threatened to pull the contract. October 21st. City inspection is scheduled for November 5th. The inspector is a guy named Melnikov. He's a legend. They say he once failed a bridge because the rivets were polished in the wrong direction. Maddox is talking about it like it's a formality. He's planning a topping-out party for the 6th. Maddox's arrogance was my greatest ally. He was so insulated by his own sense of genius that he interpreted every warning as an insult, every red flag as an attack on his authority. He was silencing the very people who could have saved him. He was steering his own ship directly at the iceberg I had so carefully placed in his path. The panic, when it finally began, was a slow leak before it became a flood. It started in the last week of October. The primary support structure for the atrium was in place. From the outside it looked magnificent. But the internal sensors, the ones the contractors had installed, were telling a different story. The strain gauges were showing minute anomalous readings. Nothing dramatic, but they were consistently stubbornly outside the acceptable parameters. Liam texted me. "They're running diagnostics 24/7. The numbers are wrong. Nobody can figure out why. It's like the whole structure is breathing." Maddox is saying the sensors are faulty. He ordered them to be recalibrated. They weren't faulty. The building was breathing. It was the thermal expansion, the subtle, deadly torque I had designed into it. It was alive, and it was slowly, silently, tearing itself apart from the inside. November 5th. Inspection day. I was in my office at Kinsley Dyer, a blank screen in front of me. Eleanor sat in the chair opposite, sipping a coffee, the picture of calm. My phone lay face up on the desk. At 9:15 a.m., it lit up. A text from Liam. Melnikov is here. He's not smiling. A knot of tension I hadn't even realized I was holding began to tighten in my stomach. This was it, the moment of truth. The next text came at 10:30 a.m. They're on the atrium. Melnikov has his own ultrasonic scanner. It looks like a prop from a sci-fi movie. I could picture the scene perfectly. Maddox all charm and confidence, gesturing expansively at his masterpiece. Melnikov, a grim, impassive Russian engineer, running his high-tech scanner over the base of the sky trusses, his face a stony mask. Another hour passed in silence. It was excruciating. I found myself tracing the shape of the atrium on my desk with my finger. Then at 11:45 a.m., my phone buzzed violently. A new text from Liam. It was just 3 words. Stop work order. Issued. A wave of something, relief, vindication, a terrifying sense of power washed over me. I looked at Eleanor. She raised her coffee cup in a silent toast. The iceberg had been struck. The ship was going down. The panic at Sterling and Croft was immediate and absolute. Liam's texts became a frantic staccato burst of information. Maddox is screaming. He's accusing Melnikov of being incompetent. The city officials are on site. They look furious. The preliminary report is devastating. Critical structural anomalies. Progressive material fatigue. Immediate public safety risk. They've roped off the whole site. The firm's stock is already plummeting in after-hours trading. The news is leaking. Maddox had thought the inspection was a formality. He had scheduled a press conference for the afternoon to announce the successful completion of the first phase. Now that press conference was still happening, but the topic had changed. The reporters were circling like sharks, smelling blood in the water. I watched it on a live stream. The picture on my monitor, a perfect mirror of the one that had started this whole journey. But this time, Maddox wasn't smiling. He looked pale, shaken, his usual swagger replaced by a brittle defensive anger. He was trying to spin it, calling it a procedural disagreement and a difference of engineering philosophy. But his eyes were darting, panicked. He was a man in a collapsing building, trying to insist the foundations were sound. He had lost control of the narrative, and I was the one who had written the new story. The aftermath was a swift and brutal unraveling. The stop work order on the city's most high-profile construction project was a major news story. Celebrated museum project halted was the headline on the front page of the city paper. The article detailed the shocking discovery of critical structural flaws and quoted an anonymous source from the city planner's office, calling it a failure of oversight of the highest magnitude. Maddox's name, the name he had been so desperate to attach to a masterpiece, was now inextricably linked to a disaster. The museum board, a collection of the city's wealthiest and most powerful patrons, was apoplectic. They were facing a public humiliation and a potential budget crisis. Their legacy project was now a toxic asset. Sterling and Croft's phones were ringing off the hook, but it wasn't new clients. It was existing clients, panicked, demanding reassurance that their own buildings, the ones designed under Maddox's oversight, were safe. The foundation of trust that a firm like S&C is built on had been fractured. It was exactly as Eleanor had predicted. The client exodus didn't happen all at once. It was a quiet, steady bleed. It started with a phone call Eleanor took in my office, putting it on speaker for me to hear. It was the CEO of Patterson Corp., the client from the Tower project years ago. Eleanor, he said, his voice tight with anxiety. I saw the news about the museum. Maddox was the partner on our headquarters. I need to know, do we have a problem? Eleanor's voice was calm, reassuring. I can't speak to Sterling and Croft's work, David, but I can tell you that we at Kinsley Dyer are making it a priority to ensure all our projects exceed safety standards. Perhaps we could have our top engineering team, led by our new partner Serena, take a look at your building's specs for you. as a professional courtesy, of course. It was a masterstroke. She didn't attack, she offered help. She positioned us as the solution, the safe harbor in the storm Maddox had created. Within a week, we had received similar calls from 3 other major S&C clients. They weren't just leaving Maddox, they were running to us. The desperate countermove from Maddox came a week after the stop work order. It was a Tuesday evening. I was at my new desk, looking over the revised construction timelines for the Phoenix project. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. Serena? The voice was strained, almost unrecognizable. It was Maddox. The arrogance was gone, scraped away, leaving behind the raw, pleading voice of a man who had lost everything. Serena, we need to talk. There's nothing to talk about, Maddox, I said, my voice as neutral as a dial tone. Listen to me, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I know you were behind this. It's brilliant. It's sick, but it's brilliant. I underestimated you. I admit it. I remained silent. I can fix this, he said, the desperation now laced with the familiar tone of a dealmaker. I will tell the board, I will tell the city, that the error was mine, a clerical mistake, and that you, in your brilliance, discovered it and have the solution. We'll be heroes. I'll make you a full senior partner. Not just a partner, a named partner. Sterling Croft, and you. Whatever you want. Triple your old salary. A public apology. I need the real plans, Serena. I need you to fix it. It was the ultimate transactional gambit. He was offering me everything he had denied me, everything he thought I had ever wanted. The title, the money, the public credit. He still didn't understand. He thought this was about a negotiation. He thought this was a problem that money and power could solve. He didn't realize this was a problem of physics. The structure had already failed. You wanted my work, Maddox, I said, my voice quiet, but each word as solid as stone. You have it. It's filed with the city. It has your name on it. It's your masterpiece. There was a long, strangled silence on the other end of the line. You can't do this, he whispered. It's too late, I said, and the words were not a threat, but a statement of fact. The demolition is already complete. I hung up the phone. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel anger. I felt balanced. The equation had been solved. I looked out the window of my new office. In the distance, the skeletal frame of the museum stood dark against the night sky, a monument not to him, but to his failure, and I was the one who was about to turn the lights back on. The final act played out with the swift, quiet efficiency of a well-designed machine. 2 days after my phone call with Maddox, Eleanor Vance and I had a meeting with the mayor and the entire museum board. We didn't walk in as supplicants. We walked in as saviors. Eleanor began the meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, her voice crisp and authoritative. You have a problem. Your project is over budget, behind schedule, and structurally unsound. Your current architectural firm has failed you and embarrassed the city. She let that hang in the air for a moment before continuing. Fortunately, we have a solution. That was my cue. I stood up and walked to the head of the table. I placed a single leather-bound portfolio in front of the mayor. This, I said, is the original intended and structurally perfect design for the City Art Museum. It has been independently reviewed and certified by one of the most respected structural engineers in the country, Mr. Arthur Vance. At the mention of Arthur's name, a murmur went through the room. His reputation was sterling. The firm of Kinsley Dyer is prepared to take over this project, effective immediately. We can have corrective work started within the week. We will absorb the cost overruns from the initial phase, and we will deliver your museum, on time, and on budget. I paused, then added the final, critical piece. And the original architect, the woman whose vision this has always been, will personally oversee every step of its construction, as a full partner in my firm. The mayor opened the portfolio. He looked at my blueprints, at Arthur's signed validation, and then at me. He saw the truth. He saw the clean, elegant solution to his disastrous problem. The decision was a foregone conclusion. Within 24 hours, the city had officially terminated its contract with Sterling and Croft, citing gross negligence. The museum project, the largest and most prestigious architectural commission in a decade, was awarded in its entirety to Kinsley Dyer. I saw Maddox one last time. It was a few weeks later. I was leaving a site meeting at the city planning department, my hard hat under my arm. He was standing across the street, just watching the entrance. He looked diminished. The expensive suit hung on him differently. The confidence that had been his defining feature was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out weariness. He saw me, and for a moment, I thought he would cross the street, that there would be some final dramatic confrontation. He took a single step off the curb, his mouth opening as if to say something. I didn't slow down. I didn't scowl. I didn't smile. I just met his gaze, held it for a single neutral beat, and gave him the slightest of nods. It wasn't a nod of forgiveness or triumph. It was a nod of dismissal, an acknowledgement that he was a thing of the past, an obstacle that had been cleared. Then I turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the shadow of the government building that had just officially erased his legacy. I learned later, through an industry newsletter, that he had been forced to resign from Sterling and Croft. The board had pushed him out. His name, once a symbol of success, was now a liability they could no longer afford. It wasn't about revenge. It was about consequence. He hadn't been destroyed by me. He had been destroyed by a flaw in his own character, a flaw I had simply reflected back at him in steel and concrete. My new reality was a world away from the shadows I had inhabited for so long. My first day on the actual construction site as the lead architect was surreal. I stood at the center of the vast open space of the atrium, the flawed steel already being carefully dismantled. I was wearing a Kinsley Dyer hard hat, and I was holding the correct set of blueprints. The new site foreman, a burly, no-nonsense man named Sal, came over to me. He looked at the plans, then at me. "So you're the one who actually knows how to build this thing," he said, a grin spreading across his face. Thank God for that. Liam was there too. He was the first person I hired at KD. I had created a new position for him, Project Integrity Manager. His job was to ensure that the vision and the reality always aligned. He looked happier, more relaxed than I had ever seen him at the old firm. Arthur came by that day as well, a paid consultant now, his official role to provide senior oversight. He stood beside me, looking up at the curving sweep of the support pylons. "It's a beautiful design, Serena," he said quietly. "It just needed the right person to build it." I looked around at the flurry of activity, at the honest, difficult work of making something real. I was no longer a ghost. I was the architect. I was in my throne room, and it wasn't an office with a view. It was a dusty, noisy construction site, and it was the most beautiful place on earth. The grand opening of the museum happened 18 months later, on a crisp autumn evening. The building was stunning, a glowing jewel against the twilight sky. The atrium, my atrium, was filled with people, their faces tilted up towards the soaring glass roof, which seemed to float weightlessly above them. It was everything I had dreamed it would be. Near the main entrance, there was a large plaque of polished black marble, the names of those who built the museum etched in silver. The mayor gave a speech. Eleanor gave a speech. They both talked about vision and partnership and resilience. Then Eleanor called me to the podium. I hadn't prepared anything. I just looked out at the crowd, at the faces looking up at me, and then I looked at the plaque. At the very top, in clean, elegant letters, it read, "Lead Architect and Partner, Serena Reyes Kinsley Dyer." My name, carved in stone, indelible. He thought the prize was getting his name on the building. Maddox never understood that the real prize was building it. He saw the blueprint as a map to glory. He never saw the work, the sweat, the physics, the soul. He wanted the credit, but he refused the responsibility. And in the end, that is the flaw that brings every bad structure down. It was never about revenge. It was about reclamation. It was about taking back the narrative, taking back my work, taking back my name. It was about ensuring that a beautiful thing was brought into the world correctly, even if I had to burn down the old workshop to build a new one. This entire experience taught me a fundamental truth. Your value isn't determined by the title someone else gives you. It's determined by the work you are capable of doing. For too long, I waited for someone else to recognize my worth, to open a door for me. I thought that loyalty and hard work would be enough. But some structures aren't built to let you rise. They're built to keep you in the foundation, holding everything up without ever seeing the sun. You can't fix a flawed foundation. You have to build your own house. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight to have your work seen, to have your voice heard, do me a favor and give this video a like. It helps to know that there are others out there who understand this fight. Share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own power. And I really want to hear from you. So leave a comment below and tell me about a time you had to build your own door when someone else tried to lock you in a room. And of course, don't forget to subscribe for more stories about getting back what's yours. Thank you for listening.